Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening to you. Why do we report Westminster at all? Why do we bang on and on about politics? Only one reason, because the choices these people make change all of our lives. Can we pay the bills at the end of the month? How much cash do we have left after the tax authorities have finished with us to have some fun? Are we condemned to stifle every summer and drown in the winter as the wilder weather driven by climate change gets wilder still? This is big, basic stuff. And this summer's argument between two people who want to become our next Prime Minister is an absolutely classic case. The gap between the economics of Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, and Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, is enormous. She wants to borrow £30 billion for tax cuts, which she says will cut inflation. He says that's fantasy economics and socialist. She says his record of tax rises is business as usual economics, driving Britain towards recession. If she wins, she promises an emergency budget to tear up more or less everything he has done. Now, both of these people are Conservatives, but the gap between them is as big as you'd find between major parties in a general election. This time, the electorate is much smaller, not 47 million people with around 160,000 Conservative members. Still, as the summer ends, one of the contenders, Rishi or Liz, will become Prime Minister. And then we'll find out who is right. And by finding out, I mean prices, taxes, jobs and debt experienced by you and by everybody listening. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined here in the studio by Rishi Sunak, slightly the underdog in the race in terms of the party in the country, if the polls are to be believed. Big if, perhaps. Can I start off with a sort of general friendly question? Rishi, you've been talking an awful lot about trust in this campaign. And one of the ways to keep trust and earn trust is, of course, to answer questions clearly and truthfully. And can we have a sort of a deal between us that it's going to be that kind of interview?
Absolutely, Andrew. It's great to be with you. We said we would try and get this done.
And we made it.
I'm glad we made it. And I'm looking forward to it.
Super. Well, in this spirit, I've noticed a change in your language during this campaign. Right at the beginning, you said you were the person who was likeliest, most able to defeat Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. And now you say you're the only person who can defeat Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. Does that mean, in clear terms, that you think if your party elects Liz Truss as its leader, it will be defeated in the next general election?
Well, I think if you look at all the polling evidence that we have and you see what that says, it's pretty clear that I am the person that is best placed to defeat Keir Starmer in the next election.
But that's going back to your previous language. You have said, I'm the only person who can do it.
Well, that's what the polling would say. But now the choice is between two people, so you can be more definitive. When there were multiple people in a race, there's obviously a broader range of candidates out there. But now we've got a sharp choice, and that's the question for our members, right? We've been in power for a while, and we need to make sure that we can keep delivering change for the British people, and that's what I will do as Prime Minister. But we then also have to go on and win a historic general election. I believe I'm the person that can do that because I'm the best placed person to beat Keir Starmer and beat the Labour Party.
And the conclusion from that is if the Conservative Party chooses Liz Truss as its leader, it is likely to go down to defeat in the next election.
So that's what all the evidence that we have today would show, and that's what our members will need to consider. But I think they can also be reassured that I share their values. I was brought up in a household where we prioritise family and hard work and education, and those are very conservative values. I mean, my story, the reason I'm sitting here, is a very conservative story. So if you're a member today and you're listening, what I want you to know is your values are my values. There are shared conservative values. I will deliver those in government to make our country the best place in the world to work, to live, to raise a family, but I will also go and deliver that general election victory for us.
Why do you think Liz Truss can't deliver that victory? What is it about her policies or her character or the way she portrays herself that makes it so hard for her?
If you don't mind, Andrew, what I'd rather do is just talk about what I can offer the country in terms of that. Now, I mean, we'll get onto the policy in a minute, but look, my pitch would be: people have seen me in this job for the last couple of years, that they know I've got the experience and the grip to handle some very difficult situations. They've seen me make sure that I help families get through some very tough times with things like the furlough scheme that we set up in a record amount of time.
Right.
We delivered successfully, and that should give people a glimpse of the kind of radical government that I can usher in that actually gets on and deliver the things that it says it will do.
Well, let's look at the policies then. What would be the impact on inflation of borrowing £30 billion for tax cuts?
You, I'm sure you've had on your show earlier, and you'll get more economists and others on, but I think most people recognise, because they have to plan their own household budgets. Many of them will run small businesses, and that's how I was brought up. My mum was a chemist, and she ran a local chemist. That's where I worked. I'd spent a lot of my time as a kid working there. I also did all her books, and learned how to make sure that it worked, that we could make payroll every month and things like that. And I think it's quite a conservative value that we have to live within our means, and that borrowing a lot, passing on a big bill to our kids and our grandkids, racking up bills on our credit card just isn't a good thing. And that's just, before we get into the tens of billions of pounds, just as a kind of basic thing, I'm sure everyone listening would recognise, debt and borrowing is not a good thing. We should try and avoid it, and we'd rather have less of it if we can.
But the tens of billions of pounds is going to affect every single one of us one way or another. So I ask again, what would be the effect on inflation of borrowing £30 billion for unfunded tax cuts?
Yes, I think it would be inflationary. Now, look, we've got a situation today where everyone knows that inflation is running much higher than we would like. We're not alone in experiencing that. That's happening in Europe and the US and other countries as well. We've got a situation where interest rates are already rising, and inflation makes everybody poorer. So if you, in that situation, my strong point of view is, if the government goes on a huge borrowing spree, that is only going to make the situation worse. And that will mean that this problem that we've got will last longer. If we don't get a grip of inflation now, it will make families poorer in the long run. And I want to avoid that at all costs.
Some people see an echo of the so-called Barber boom, the dash for growth in the 1970s, which ended up with hyperinflation and disaster. Is that the kind of thing looking forward that you're worried about?
I'm worried about the inflation that we've got at the moment becoming embedded and lasting far longer. That's going to be so damaging for everyone listening, because it's going to erode all the savings that they've worked really hard to build up. It's going to push up their mortgage rates. And interest rates have to go up very high to deal with it.
And that, in your view, is what unfunded tax cuts would do now?
That's what I'm worried about. But you talked about growth. The kind of growth we need is not that kind of short-term growth that makes the situation worse and pushes up interest rates much higher. The kind of growth we need is sustainable, that builds growth for the long run. And that's the kind of thing where we need to take advantage of some of the freedoms we've got from Brexit. Those are the things that I started to deliver as Chancellor, and I want to do more of. And free ports, for example, are a good example of that, where we can create zones around the country, which we couldn't do inside the EU, and that we're setting them up already. They're attracting jobs and investment to places like Teesside, or here in the Thames Estuary, or Humberside. That's the type of long-run sustainable growth that we need.
I've got two little Rishi Sunak texts. I am a Thatcherite. I am running as a Thatcherite, and I will govern as a Thatcherite. Would Margaret Thatcher have put up corporation tax?
Well, I think you've heard from lots of people who are familiar with her economics. You heard from Nigel Lawson's son, you heard from William Hague, you heard from others. I think what I'm doing is common sense Thatcherism. I think people know that she gripped inflation first.
But she also cut corporation tax specifically from 52% to 34%. You are raising it from 19% to 25%. What's Thatcherite about that?
Well, what we are doing is actually combining that with some other reforms to make the system much more generous for the things that we know actually drive growth. And that's businesses to actually invest. It's all very well businesses making a profit, and that's something fantastic that I support. But what I want them to do with that is to invest that in the economy. That's how we help drive growth in this country. So even though the corporation tax will go up, I think that's really perfectly reasonable, because everyone knows we've spent a fortune during COVID to help get the country through it. Businesses got a lot of support, and I think it's entirely reasonable that the largest businesses, because by the way, what you're talking about, it only applies to the largest businesses. The top 10% of businesses, small businesses are exempt from it, so we're protecting small businesses.
Big investment and lots of jobs. Let me put to you the other point of view, which is John Redwood, who was in his day chief policy advisor to Margaret Thatcher. He says, how can Rishi Sunak think sandbagging UK business with a 31% hike in the rate of corporation tax is what we need to promote growth and investment? Businesses do not need to invest here. They can choose. You cannot tax your way to growth, nor can you tax your way to an election of victory. And that is what the other side say all the time.
So let's just go through it so everyone listening knows where we are. So first of all, starting point, why are we having this conversation at all? Because everybody knows we had to do a lot to get the country through COVID. Everyone knows whether it was furlough, whether it was supporting small businesses, supporting public services like the NHS, we did have to spend a lot. And I think most reasonable people realise, of course, that has to be paid back, all right? And we need to pay that back. So let's think about how best to do that. Is it reasonable that the biggest businesses in the country, the top 10% of businesses, shoulder some of that burden? I think that's entirely reasonable. I think that's fair. I think most people listening, would agree with that. Small businesses are exempt from this, by the way, right? So the vast majority of businesses in this country, the small businesses that we want to support, are not going to see this increase. It's just the biggest businesses. And then let's look at that rate. Let's talk about investment. So it's 25%. Does that sound high? Does that sound low? Well, let me tell you this. Of all the big economies that we compete with, it will still be the lowest rate. France, Germany, Italy, America, Canada, Japan will have the lowest rate. If you broaden that out to the 20 largest economies of the world... But you really have to lure those companies here, and it's much less of a lure as you raise it. But it's still lower than all those other countries, right? And so, but this is really important because we talk about investment, and I'm really passionate about driving growth in this country because that's not a weird word. What does it mean? It means better jobs for people with better wages. We can't get that unless businesses actually invest. So what we are going to do is cut taxes on business investment. So when businesses invest in things that are good for all of us, that help drive up our growth, that create jobs, that create better paid jobs, that's where we're going to cut taxes because that's the thing that we want. So I do want to cut taxes, but I want to do it in a way that actually delivers what we want and does it in a way that's not inflationary. We do have low growth in this economy and we've had low productivity. It's a long-standing problem. Let me give you a second and related Rishi Sunak text. I would deliver a set of reforms as radical as the ones Margaret Thatcher drove through in the 1980s to unleash growth and prosperity. Now, that is a very, very big thing to say. I mean, she broke union power. She privatised a vast swathe of the economy. Do you really have ideas as big as that to get growth back? Well, the big thing that we have at our disposal to help us think about things differently, to bring radical change, is Brexit, right? So we've had all the debates on Brexit, but it's happened. I voted for it, and I think it's the right thing to do. So give me some examples of concrete real things that you would do as a result of Brexit that would get growth back into the economy. So I'm already in the process of delivering one, and that's free ports, which I touched on earlier. So for everyone listening, what are free ports? Free ports are special economic zones that we can create in certain parts of the country. With low taxes. That benefit from beneficial taxes and customs arrangements to help with trade and planning permissions, everything that supports business and enterprise. Though, Rishi, we could have done that inside the EU. There are lots of free ports inside the EU. But they are, and I wrote a very big paper on this, and everyone can go and read about it online. But the free ports that you can do inside the EU are nowhere near as supportive of investment and growth as the ones that we're creating. But look, this is not theory. This is working, right? So anyone, go to Teesside today, where there's a free port, where the mayor of Teesside has championed it. It's already attracting companies like GE, which are investing there, building factories there, creating high-paid jobs there. That's a type of radical thing that we can do and we can replicate around the world. Give me another example. Another example. Now, this is getting a bit technical, but it's in financial services. Now, financial services, people think of as a city, but they shouldn't, because of the 1 million people that are employed in financial services, 2/3 of them are outside London and the southeast. So this is something that we are really good at as an economy, and we need to make sure that we continue to make sure that it's successful. Big Bang Volume 2? Absolutely. So just about to be introduced in Parliament is a huge piece of legislation with a sweeping set of reforms to financial services regulation that put the power back here in the UK away from Brussels and deliver tons of things that make it a more competitive place to do business. Now, rather than get into all the detail of that, but I think changes to financial regulation and free ports are not quite at the same scale as mass privatisation and breaking the power of the trade unions. Actually, it's forecast that free ports can create tens of thousands of jobs across this country, and those will be well-paid jobs in places where we need them. Right. The financial services reforms that we're doing are going to have a real impact on people. I'll give you an example. By reforming the rules on our insurance companies, we can unlock tens of billions of pounds of capital out of those companies that can then be invested around the UK in real businesses, and that's going to support people's jobs. It's going to support their livelihoods. So these are some pretty big things.
Let me ask you a little bit about tax, if I may, because you've offered a penny off income tax in 2 years' time, and a lot of party members sitting around tonight wondering who to vote for will be thinking, is that it?
On tax, I set out a roadmap for how to do this a few months ago. So just this month, we've already delivered a tax cut, and that we raised the amount of money that people could earn without paying a penny of income tax and national insurance. I did that. It's making a difference in people's paychecks. Everyone listening this month, it's worth about £330 a year. It's actually more generous than an income tax cut, and that's happening this month. And yes, we will deliver another income tax cut over this Parliament, and that's already in the plans and has been paid for and is consistent with us making sure we get a grip of inflation and not making the problem worse, because I want to put more money in people's pockets. Of course I do.
Let me ask you about something that is likely to happen, I fear, this winter, which is because of the war and the Russians pushing ahead and problems over food supplies and choking off energy, we're going to have another spike in inflation and a real sense of crisis right across the West. Putin is clearly banking on this and hoping that Western unity is fractured. But for an awful lot of people in this country, it's going to be another period of absolute terror as to whether they can pay their bills. Do you have an emergency answer for them if that happens?
Well, one of the last things I did as Chancellor was stand up and announce a significant amount of support to help everybody get through the autumn and winter, because we knew that energy bills were going to rise substantially to around £3,000. And on average, that's about £1,000 extra this year on people's energy bills than they had to pay last year. It's an enormous sum of money.
Right.
And the support that we've announced puts around £1,200 in the pockets of the most vulnerable third of all families in this country, because that's the right thing to do.
You're going to have to do it again, is my point, probably, or you may well have to do it again.
I think I've demonstrated over the past couple of years that, as and when the situation demands it, I will act to help people get through it.
Let me try and ventriloquise, if I might, the kind of Liz Truss point of view, which is that, I had Steve Baker in that chair yesterday, and he was saying, on current spending, big parts of the British state are going to go bankrupt within my lifetime. We cannot carry on like this. We do need a radical change. She says that there is headroom for her plans, and she makes a perfectly fair point that we've had the highest taxes for 70 years, and we've got lower debt at the moment than the United States, Japan and Canada. No other countries, she says, are raising tax at the moment. Does she not have a point? Do you not have to think a little bit more radically?
So I think the thing that we need to recognise is that we've just suffered a massive pandemic, right, which drove our borrowing and debt.
So has everybody.
Yeah, but it drove our borrowing and debt up to levels we hadn't seen since World War II. And I think the right economic thing, and in fact the right moral thing as a Conservative, as someone who believes in sound money, as Margaret Thatcher did, is something that the Conservative Party holds dear as one of our defining values. I think it is reasonable and right to get our borrowing and debt down over time. We're not going to do it overnight, but we've got to get ourselves on a trajectory to get it down. Now, you mentioned a few other countries, right? What's happening in the US? Well, the excessive...
we haven't got time to go through all the other countries. We haven't got time to go through all of them.
It's worth knowing that you mentioned the US as an example. The US, because they've borrowed so much, interest rates in the US are considerably higher than they are here. Yeah. Now, if the idea is that everyone's mortgage rates should be much higher than they are today, I'm not sure that's not a great solution for people listening.
One of you or Liz Truss, is going to be in charge of this country for two years plus, quite a long time. What does what you describe as fairy tale economics do to the British economy over 2 years?
I think the first thing to think about is trust. Now, part of the reason we're having this leadership election, there was a breakdown in trust, and part of why I want to be Prime Minister is to restore trust in government. And that starts with being honest with people, honest about the challenges that we face, but also the change that I will bring to grip them. But it also means not promising things that can't be delivered. And it's obviously, look, it would be incredibly easy for me to sit here. God, wouldn't my life be easier if I just sat here and I'm going to do this lovely sounding thing and this lovely sounding thing? But that wouldn't be leadership.
So it
wouldn't be being honest. And actually, I think it would damage trust. Because part of rebuilding trust is for the government and politicians to deliver the things that they say. And sitting here and promising you a bunch of things that I don't think are right or deliverable would be wrong.
To be honest, between us sitting here, you don't think that she is being honest?
Look, I'm being honest about the challenges we face, and I'm being honest about what we should do to grapple with them and how we should do that responsibly. And I don't want to promise things that I don't believe can be delivered, even though it would make my life easier.
Sure. Right? Let me just ask you about a few other things.
Yes.
What needs to be changed on our immigration policy?
Well, first of all, we need to make sure that we make our Rwanda policy work. Now, I voted for Brexit for many reasons, but in part because it gave us the ability to control our borders. And I say that as someone who's proudly from a family of immigrants.
A lot of people say a family of immigrants, you're the last person that should be driving people off to flying them off to Rwanda, no, particularly when they're vulnerable.
It's actually the opposite. This country did something amazing for my family, and it welcomed them as immigrants. But and that's part of the reason I'm standing and sort of sitting here today with you, is because
not welcoming people now,
because of the opportunities that this country gave my family, and I want to repay that, and I want to make sure that opportunity is available for others. But we do need to have control of our borders. When my grandparents came here, they came here because the British government had decided that it wanted them to come here. And it is absolutely right that we continue as a country to decide who we want to come here.
Okay.
And I think it's entirely reasonable that at the same time as we welcome the best and the brightest, which is what we're now doing and what I championed in government, by the way, a set of reforms to make sure that this was the best place in the world for the most talented, brightest, innovators, researchers to come here, we get a control of our borders. People are seeing on their screens that boats are arriving. It shows that we haven't got a grip of it, and I think the Rwanda policy gives us the opportunity to solve that, but we now need to make it work. Right. And one of my priorities will be to make that policy work properly so that we have proper control of our borders.
We asked listeners and viewers to send us some questions they would like me to ask you, and here is a question that somebody called Josh wants me to ask you. Please, can you ask Mr. Sunak if he has ever opened and used offshore banking trusts in a tax haven?
No.
All right, that's a good one. Let me ask you in that case about climate change. When you saw those images yesterday of those burning houses, did you think this is being caused by climate change?
So I've been very clear and open. I mean, I have two young girls who are 9 and 11, and they are rarely that bothered about my job for the past couple of years. But as I always say, the only time my life intersects with theirs, if something shows up in the week junior that I'm doing, then they're interested in it. But the thing they do ask me about is, what are you doing for the climate, Daddy? What are you doing for the environment?
So you really believe in it? Because it seems to me that in this contest so far, we haven't had, as it were, a clear, straight, honest leadership from any of you about the climate emergency that we face, the seriousness of it, and how much all of our lives are going to have to change as a result.
Yeah, so of course I believe in climate change. I believe in our target. As Prime Minister, I will continue to deliver on the agenda that we've set out. It's one of the things that we've displayed global leadership in, which is fantastic, actually. But there are people have different approaches to it, Andrew, right? So there are some people who think, gosh, we need to completely change the way we live. We have to destroy the capitalist economy and everyone has to pay a lot more. But that's not my approach to solving this problem. My approach to solving this problem is by figuring out how we use innovation to help us, as we have throughout history. And
more wind farms on land across the UK?
Well, I think wind farms onshore are tricky, but wind farms offshore have proven to be incredibly successful in providing cheap energy. But look, I'm a big optimist about the future, and technology and innovation repeatedly throughout our history has been the way that we solve big problems. And you know what? British scientists, British researchers, British companies have been at the forefront of that, and they are doing it now. Rishi, and they'll do it again for us.
Let me ask you a bit more about you. Have you ever had to worry about money in your life?
Yeah, so I talked to you a little bit about it earlier when I was growing up. So my mum was a local chemist, and that was our small business. And I worked in my mum's shop, and that's how I grew up. But I also did her books. I also did her accounts, and my grandfather taught me how to do that. And so, I was a person who saw very keenly with her when it was tricky, because we had to make sure that we could meet payroll at the end of every month and make sure everyone got paid and that we could pay the bills in the business. Because my parents put their heart and soul into providing a better life for their kids, and they worked exceptionally hard to do that.
When was the last time that you or your family used the NHS?
I mean, you wouldn't expect me to talk about my kids' medical, but of course we use the NHS. My dad spent his entire career as an NHS GP. My mum was a chemist. My whole extended family, one way or another, work in healthcare. That was the family I was raised in. And I mean, you mentioned the NHS.
Let me ask you about one other question.
Just quickly on the NHS is really important, right? Because I did something that was clearly not easy for me politically, and that was to create a new way for us to fund the NHS and social care. Because I saw what happened during coronavirus and what happened in social care. And I also saw at the end of it the backlogs that we have to grapple with, that many people listening will have someone in their family waiting for a cancer screening or a hip replacement or some kind of surgery. And for me, I wanted to make sure that the NHS was properly supported to get to grips with that. So I did something that was not easy, but I thought it was the right thing to do for this country. So I think no one can doubt my commitment to the NHS.
You are still not very popular among Tory members compared to your competitor. And that is because, in the end, you were disloyal to Boris Johnson. And the word being used among groups of Tory voters at the moment about you is backstabber.
That I worked closely with the Prime Minister for the last 2 and a bit years. And I'm really proud of many of the things that we achieved during that time in government together.
Are you sorry he's no longer Prime Minister?
Oh, I'm sorry I had to resign. It wasn't a decision that I took lightly. It was a really difficult decision.
Not the same thing. Are you sorry he's no longer Prime Minister?
Well, now I'm looking forward, and I believe I can bring change. But look, it got to a point where, and I do believe there was only one person back then who could do what he did, and that was break the Brexit deadlock, deliver an election victory. And then since then, whether it was tackling COVID, standing up to Ukraine, he's done some extraordinary things, which I'm proud to be a part of. But look, it got to a point where enough was enough. For me personally, I mean, everyone saw what happened with the Chris Pincher situation, and also on the economy, we were going in different directions.
It got to that point. Why did you register ready for Rishi back in December?
Oh, gosh, I didn't do that. People register and trade domain names all the time.
But that sounds a little bit like Boris Johnson saying he didn't know what was going on in Downing Street.
No, I didn't do that. I tell you what I was doing in December, though, because I shall remember it quite vividly. What I did in December was fly back from a government trip I was on overseas, and I flew back to this country to stop us sleepwalking into a national lockdown. Because we were hours away from a press conference that was going to lock this country down again because of Omicron. And I came back and fought very hard against the system because I believe that would be the wrong thing for this country, with all the damage it would have done to businesses, to children's education, to people's lives. No, but that's really important in December, Andrew, because we were hours away. We were hours away from a national lockdown, but I came back and challenged the system and said this is not right and we don't need to do this. And I'm glad I won the argument. But it should give people some confidence that in the same way I stood up for Brexit, in the same way I did that, I am prepared to push hard and fight for the things that I believe in, even when that's difficult.
A sort of related question from another listener called Angela. She says, can you confirm you will promptly appoint an independent ethics advisor with power to instigate investigations and you will be bound by the results?
I definitely will reappoint an independent ethics advisor, and it'll be one of the first things I do.
Would you bring Lord Geit back if he was prepared to?
Well, I haven't had that conversation with Lord Geit, so...
Would you, if he was prepared to come back, would you do that?
Well, I probably would, because I thought he did a good job in the first place. But as I said, I haven't spoken to him about it, so I don't want to put him in an awkward position. But I forget who was it that asked the question? I don't know, Angela, right? I mean, Angela... Restoring trust is at the heart of what I want to bring to the job. And one of the first things I will do is make sure that we put in place the structures and the accountability like you're talking about, so that all of you listening can have faith that the system will work. And if people are not behaving in the way they should be, that there will be proper accountability for that. And having an independent ethics advisor is obviously critical to doing that.
If you get back in, will you keep the wallpaper?
Gosh, I'm not thinking that far ahead at this point, Andrew.
All right.
But we have also already had the privilege of living in Downing Street, but in the other flat. So,
one very final question about what drives you. People are driven by all sorts of things, raw ambition and all the ideology and all the rest of it. Now, I know that you are from a Hindu background. Are you a man of faith, and does that influence how you think about the world?
Yes, I am.
So what does Hinduism bring to you?
Well, I think everyone's faith brings something different to them. I'm a practicing Hindu. Funnily enough, I was at my local temple a few weeks ago in Southampton, because every year our family takes care of a lunch, and we cook the lunch and serve the lunch to everybody. And it was really nice to be back home. And funnily enough, I did the equivalent of a Sunday school when I was younger, and I went to go and see the kids who are doing it now and have a chat with them. And those are my roots. That's where I came from. And when you say what drives me is that this country did something extraordinary for my family when it welcomed them here 60 years ago, and it provided the opportunities for my mum and dad to build a life for themselves, to work really hard and provide this phenomenal life for their children, me and my brother and sister. Family is everything to me. It's core to who I am. And to have a country where you can work hard, sacrifice, and aspire to build a better future is why I'm sitting here. And that's why I want to be Prime Minister, because I want to spread that same opportunity to millions of other children and grandchildren. That's why I want to do this.
A lot of hard work to do over August. Rishi Sunak, has been really interesting. Thanks so much for coming in and talking to me.
Thank you, Andrew.
Coming up, I'll be getting a reaction to that exclusive interview with Rishi Sunak, but Amelia Cox, meanwhile, has your news headlines.
Rishi Sunak has suggested to LBC he believes Labour would win the next election if Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister. Speaking exclusively to Tonight with Andrew Marr, the former Chancellor has insisted his economic plan is common sense Thatcherism.
If you're a member today and you're listening, what I want you to know is your values are my values. There are shared Conservative values. I will deliver those in government to make our country the best place in the world to work, to live, to raise a family. But I will also go and deliver that general election victory for us.
The chair of the coronavirus inquiry